Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everegg's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back this week with a bit of an update on the market, an overview of GDT event number 370, a big look at some trade data that's just come in, and of course, chat of the week.
Let's get going.
Yeah, and I guess the big news from the last week, Steve, is the big movements in European butter and cream prices over the last week. So we've seen cream prices really descending very fast. Spot butter prices have also tumbled. We're no longer in that unprecedented territory, although things are still elevated. The cliff that we usually see in mid-November has been delayed, not avoided, obviously. So what's going on here, Steve?
Well, we're still, as you say, still quite elevated. We've that typical slump in prices we've seen. The averages below these are seasonality curves, so they take the start of year as a starting point. We've just been in elevated times for most of the year with the tighter supplies in the European market, which have persisted. So we've had weakness in milk supplies. We've had reasonably persistent demand, particularly in cheese. That's starting to slow now, obviously, with elevated prices, but we're still well above where we've been in the last few years. And that's, I guess the uncertainty is where we head next. And so looking to futures.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the butter futures really haven't responded that much to that changed spot market situation. Still a bit of an uncertainty about the milk response. We do have quite high milk prices being paid to farmers at the moment, but we're still seeing France and Germany, those big EU milk producers, lagging year-ago levels. Much better growth out of Ireland and Poland at the moment, but maybe just still a little bit of uncertainty there, Steve, in terms of what's going to ensue in 2025.
Yeah, I think there's still, those countries where they can grow milk. I mean, seasonally, we're lifting quite steeply in Germany in particular. From here, it'd be interesting to see whether this year's line goes up with the steepness of last year's. But just that seasonal milk availability is naturally depressing prices, but where we go is unclear. Skim milk powder markets are also weaker. This is just looking at the SGX, probably the most interesting one to pull out. The lack of that demand pull is still not coming through. And, while New Zealand season looks okay, they're starting to get a bit anxious and looking at the radar because we have seen a little drying out in conditions. But I think, on the ground, there's still adequate feed.
Yeah, and just looking at SGX futures for whole milk powder, Steve, whole milk powder futures did weaken this week after a pretty good run for the last few weeks. And again, just, you get the feeling that lack of sustained Chinese demand pull is the main reason there. And that's a pretty good segue into this week's GDT result.
It is. A lot of action here. Hardly Christmas cheer. Down 2.8% overall in the index. And this time it makes sense, right, when you see those falls. Whole milk powder down nearly 2.5%. The regular product lost 2.8%, $100. But as you can see, the losses got worse as you went later. Skim milk powder flipped that. The losses got easier or less as you went further out. It was more mixed in terms of the origins because the EU prices were quite mixed in that as well. Butter nearly flat, lost a little bit overall. AMF was the big loser, 4.2% on average, but the C2 contract dropped 7%. And cheddar was almost flat, a bit of up and down, and some contracts were a bit all over the place, as it always is with cheddar.
And this tells a story, Steve, around demand. Generally weaker across these major categories. Powders were well below the average for this event and a much shorter event in duration as a result of that. Butter was the standout. This time, demand was better than average, but it didn't deliver again. And that's, partly, I guess, reflecting a bit more availability of fats in this event. It wasn't enough to actually push the price higher.
I could show you some really boring charts, Joe, about, why it didn't carry into a gain, but I've resisted. Going to the whole milk powder losses, which, as we said, got a little worse later on, but the buying is more interesting here, Joe.
Yeah, and I guess the percentage involvement from Chinese buyers, which we've seen fairly consistently above 60 to 60% in the last few events, it was down below 40% at event number 370. That's the weakest volume purchased since August 2024. So is the restocking activity that we've seen there starting to slow? Chinese New Year is 2 weeks earlier than last year. Maybe a lot of that restocking is done. Just looking at the period since event 14, so the second August auction over halfway through the year, this year has been 11% higher in terms of Chinese purchases. This compares over the whole of 2024, though, was 15% lower. So a lot of activity in the second half of the year, Steve, but overall still lower purchases for all of 2024.
Skimmer powder again, we're seeing this just slowly ease. Been a theme in the last few weeks. Consistent losses across contracts, but again, the buying was quite interesting.
Yeah, Chinese buying accounted for more than half of the volume sold at this event for skim milk powder. And it's been up 25% since August, but still 17% below the entire year. So it just shows how weak that buying activity was in the first part of 2024, Steve.
And when we compare skim across exchanges, Joe,
Yeah, look, this is where we are. I mean, the things are converging more, and they've been pretty reasonably tight for skim milk powder. Those NZX futures, again, still a lot higher than the GDT buyers can support. And CME futures up there a little bit. A lot of internal supply issues really dominating there for Steve.
coming together closer into the future, though, those two
Yeah.
lines. AMF was where the biggest action was in the event, as we saw, 7% down on that C2 contract. Ironically, a little bit of carry into the later prices by dipping so strongly earlier, which risk management analysts would laugh at. But when we look at global comparison of butter, we've seen more weakness in New Zealand, the US lately, and futures. A little change in the EU, as we saw. So it's coming together a little. And interestingly, the NZX futures are below the GDT results in this case. Pretty skinny trade in the butter market there. This is interesting, how, Joe?
You know how much I love this whole milk powder versus synthetic fat and protein value chart, Steve. And what you get when you put the cheaper powders and the slump in AMF together out of this GDT event, those values have pretty much come together. There's a very skinny margin, maybe $70 a tonne, but this is the first time in 18 months that we've seen that whole milk powder discount basically eliminated. We use the EU skim milk powder in this one for the dotted line, as it's the cheapest skim milk powder out there, but an interesting one to track, Steve.
Yeah. There's a lot of eyes on the cheese market on GDT. There's small volumes, but some important signals there. So mozzarella fell 2.6% at the CITRA contract to below 4,100. It's just Belgian product. Arla came back on the exchange this time with some small volumes. Theirs was a lower price. It slipped almost to 4,000. But the equivalent is interesting because that's the equivalent of 38.20 in euros per tonne, which is a little below the quotes for mozzarella that Trigona just issued earlier this morning. But interestingly, that mozzarella price is below the CME February contract at $1.85 a pound today. So US exporters will be disappointed with that. But the easing fat market is easing the cheese market in Europe, and these prices are continuing to tumble. It's just how far they'll go down. Joe, some global trade came out. We've added up today, and it's still in process, but our colleague Vuko has pulled this one out.
Yes, some interesting trade numbers here, Steve, for October, up 7.3% in milk solids equivalent terms. And that's a 4.1% increase for the 3 months to October. So pretty strong performance there. And the big product movers were whole milk powder, which was up 8%. Skim milk powder was a little bit below flat. Fats were up 10% despite those very strong prices. Cheese up 5%, but at the big moves, maybe not so effective in MSC terms, but MPC was up 35% and WPC 80 up 20%. So big volumes in terms of trade for those high value products.
And this chart looks at where the demand has come from. China has booked some year-on-year growth. It hasn't happened much in the last couple of years. That's to do with that restocking in whole milk powder that we've been seeing, and strong growth in whey, that's dry whey and WPC 80. But most of the growth has come from other markets. And so just calling that out, I mean, in terms of the impact on global trade, the big changes have been the increased demand in Mexico. Skim milk powder and cheese demand is still growing there quite strongly year on year. Butter into the US from Europe, mostly Ireland. And this is a bit of front loading, we suspect. Pretty strong numbers the last couple of months, getting ahead of what is expected to be a harsh tariff regime between the EU and US. EU expecting to see import tariffs come on, affecting butter. The other growth area is sub-Saharan Africa, which is just recovery, really, just a bit of, and that's basic fat-filled commodities going in there, but that's also been growing. Southeast Asia, just booking small growth, and you can actually see it there in that tiny green area. But the Middle East, North Africa region is in contraction, and those guys know how to stay away from high prices. So, chart of the week, Joe, how will you bring us home?
Yeah, look, we're going to stay in the trade space, Steve. And we've got some European export data, again, up to October. We're looking at skim milk powder, Steve, here, and we're looking at an 8-year low in skim milk powder exports in October. 17% down year on year and 14% down in the quarter to the end of October. So the biggest losses in terms of this trade have been into Southeast Asia, Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. And Chinese share has been lost to New Zealand over this period, as well as there being just a lot less available out of Europe. So, but very, very low numbers there, Steve.
Okay. Well, that's all from us this week, and we'll be back. We won't be back next week. Joe, what's the plan?
Yeah, look, there'll be no updates from us until the 8th of January. We're taking a bit of a Christmas New Year break. We did want to take this opportunity at the end of the year to make big thanks to Nana and Paige, who are tasked with putting this video together every week and trying to make sense of what we say. And also to our colleagues, Erica and Phil, who have to check that we don't say anything inflammatory or that would get us sued. Take a moment, if you have it, to have a look at our bloopers reel. It should come up in the next week or so on your feeds, hopefully. It's actually, strangely, Steve, one of our most watched videos every year. Just people love to see us make idiots of ourselves. It's amazing.
They like to see us stuff up more than what we normally do, and there's stuff that makes it through to the final product.
Yeah, what on earth ends up on the cutting room floor? Well, you'll see. So that's all from us until 2025. We hope you have a great festive season and get a little rest, and we'll see you on the 8th of January.